Chers participants, nous avons aujourd'hui la chance d'accueillir parmi nous la commissaire de l'Union africaine chargée de l'éducation, de la science, de la technologie et de l'innovation. C'est une chance, c'est un honneur. Nous voudrions bien l'accueillir et lui donner la parole pour son message de solidarité. Donc la parole est à Madame Sarah de l'Union africaine pour son message de solidarité.
Merci beaucoup, cher frère. Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can hear me. Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are. On behalf of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency, Dr. Musa Faki Mahamat, it gives me great pleasure and it is an honor to be invited to give remarks at this policy dialogue event on domestic financing for education in Africa under the theme, Increase Domestic Financing for Strong Public, Inclusive and Resilient Education Systems in Africa during and post-COVID-19. This is a momentous time and the theme, Policy Dialogue Event on Domestic Financing for Education, is very, very important, particularly with the post-COVID recovery. Let me from the onset congratulate the African Network Campaign on Education for All, ANSEFA, and partners from the Global Campaign for Education for organizing this virtual event. With the closure of schools as a result of COVID-19 containment measures, education systems in Africa were severely tested. The crisis in learning, ensuring equity, relevance, and affordability that Africa's education systems were already facing prior to the pandemic have been exacerbated and threatened the development efforts that have been made so far. Indeed, I agree with the previous speaker that you cannot speak of all the other SDGs without talking about SDG 4. And in the same thing today, that you cannot speak of the aspirations of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, without consolidating on the Continental Education Strategy for Africa 2016-2025. According to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, Africa has the highest rates of education exclusion. Over 1/5 of children between the ages of about 6 and 11 are out of school, followed by 1/3 of youth between the ages of about 12 and 14. Additionally, almost 60% of youth between the ages of about 15 and 17 are not in school. This is not the Africa we want. The COVID-19 pandemic has founded deep-seated inequalities in access to education, learning outcomes, and digital connectivity, and exposed weaknesses in education systems, including inadequate water and sanitation in many schools. In order for African countries to recover from the shocks occasioned to the education systems, it is imperative that more investments are made in the education sector. This calls for mobilization of more resources and utilizing them more efficiently as we strive to strengthen the link between spending and education outcomes. The learning crisis in education calls for a new approach for elevating domestic financing to the highest political level to protect, improve, better target, and account for enhanced public spending in education. This is with the recognition that domestic finance is the most significant and sustainable source of financing for education in member states because implementation takes place at the member states countries. According to the African Education Fund feasibility study undertaken by the African Development Bank, $40 billion is needed yearly to bridge the education financing gap by 2030. The report further observes that education in Africa remains underfunded, especially in fragile states and low-income countries. This situation is also echoed in the Education Finance Watch, the new joint World Bank UNESCO report, which states that education budgets are not adjusting proportionately to the challenges brought about by COVID-19, especially in poorer countries. Despite additional funding needs, two-thirds of low and lower middle income countries have in fact cut their public education budgets since the onset of the pandemic. And this is very, very deplorable. If we speak of inclusivity, we need to go back and increase financing on education. If we speak of inclusivity, we need to bridge the digital divide and also invest in green energy. If not, the children in the rural areas, in the remote areas, will not be able to have access to education. As noted in the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, 2016-2025, innovative mechanisms for sustainable financing and mobilization of resources are a prerequisite for the success and accelerated implementation of the strategy. Significantly, the strategy also affirms that new financing mechanisms must be implemented, including the effective deployment of the private sector, diversification, and increasing the funding resources, including private investment, foreign direct investment, diaspora, foundations, and other champions. So we need an intersectoral, multi-sectoral synergy in financing. It is quite encouraging that there is already a lot of support towards this end that includes scholarship schemes. Moreover, the African Union Agenda 2063 10-year plan of action calls for domestic resource mobilization as a contribution to at least 75% to 90% of the financing on average per country, namely through, among others, 1, enhanced fiscal resource mobilization, 2, maximization of natural resource strengths from, among others, like agriculture, maritime, tourism, mineral resources, 3, the leveraging of the increasingly important pool of African institutional savings, including pension funds, central bank foreign exchange reserves, sovereign wealth funds, and capital market development. 4, enhance retail savings mobilization through financial inclusion, namely the curbing of illicit financial flows, and 6, the reduction of inefficiency and governance, corruption-based financial leakages and wastages. At the continental level, the African Union is partnering with the African Development Bank to set up the African Education Science Technology Fund for resourcing tertiary, technology, technical, and science education in Africa. When operational, the African Education Science Technology Innovation Fund will make available $300 million to finance and scale up to $1 billion over 10 years to technical and vocational education and training and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in Africa. Excellencies, distinguished partners and stakeholders, at the global level, as we look forward to the upcoming Global Partnership for Education Summit in July 2021, it is important that African countries make strong domestic financing commitments and in support to a collective Pan-African statement that addresses education challenges in Africa post-COVID-19. This is very, very important for African Union member states to have ownership. In conclusion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to advocate for increased domestic financing for education in Africa, we must also emphasize the need for member states to adopt policies that increase and protect education funding, while at the same time making better use of the allocated funds. The political will must follow the desire and the vision for sustainable development with accuracy, accountability, and transparency. In essence, therefore, spending ought to be aligned more strongly to improvements in education outcomes, This also calls for improvements in monitoring and financial planning mechanisms, including strengthening capacity and systems in member states to collect and track education spending. Through developing and utilization of better tools for collecting information on education spending through, for example, the National Education Accounts approach and strengthening education models in household expenditure surveys. Such information and data should be readily available for evidence-based policy making. Honorables, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, may I once again register my appreciation to the organizers for the kind invitation to join you at this event and to share my thoughts on increased domestic financing for strong, public, inclusive, and resilient education systems in Africa during and post-COVID-19. The efficacy of education financing mechanisms must ultimately focus on addressing the nascent challenges, including enhancing education equity, quality, and relevance of education systems in member states. Thank you very much, and I congratulate you once again. Thank you, sir.
Merci, merci, merci. Grand merci donc à l'honorable commissaire de l'Union africaine pour l'éducation, la science, la technologie et l'innovation. S'il n'y avait pas cette COVID, c'est sûr qu'on aurait enregistré une pluie d'applaudissements. Merci pour ce message très fort.
Merci aussi, mon frère.
Voilà. Maintenant, après